All right. Hello and welcome aboard the Gallant Says podcast. It is Sunday night, November 23rd, 2023. And I am Paul Gallant. You can catch this thing live, definitely at youtube.com/Paul Gallant, twitch.tv/Gallant Says. We do it Sunday night after Texans games. We do it Monday night. We do it Thursday night when I'm feeling up to it. It also may be available on Twitter at Gallant Says. Not 100% sure if that has been officially set up, or on Instagram for now at Sports Gallant, and it might be on TikTok in the near future. Trying some new things, trying to get this bad boy out on more platforms. And if you want to hear it in podcast form, Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, SoundCloud, you ever have a question, gallantsays@gmail.com. We're talking all things Texans, Jaguars after the Jacksonville Jaguars put a bit of a stranglehold on first place in the AFC South with a 24-21 victory over your Houston Texans. We got some comments already. Paul Lopa, youtube.com/Paul Gallant comments, refs have parlay set up. Patin Delgadillo comments, facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. The secondary wasn't good, but the refs sucked terribly. They extended drives in the red zone that shouldn't have been. All of that is fair. But I'm not going to join in with you. One of the things that has frustrated me as, an outsider, but somebody who's been here for a while, we're talking a decade now, has been specifically Rockets fans, but a tendency for Houston sports fans to blame everything on the refs. They want the other team to win. Why the fuck would they want the Jaguars to win? No offense. Why would they want the Jaguars, who are a tiny little media market, to win? Why? Just think about it. Why? I'm not saying the refs were good. I'm just asking, why would it benefit the NFL to have the Jaguars win? I think most people who follow the NFL are in the same boat when it comes to Trevor Lawrence. He's good. He's not great. They're trying to make it seem as if he's great, but if you watch today's game, even though the statistic line is pretty impressive, I think we'd all come away from it saying that, Lawrence isn't the best. Stroud's clearly better than Lawrence based off of what we saw today. So if you want to blame the refs, and we'll talk about the refs in a moment, because that throw down the left sideline to Tank Dell, that was definitely a catch. I want to talk about the defense first. You have to be really careful when you're assigning blame for coverage if you don't know the calls on the field. I think for anyone who watches the game on their television, you're not even really seeing half of the field on a given pass play. You will see a trailing defensive back or a defensive back coming in for a tackle on a play. But generally, when you're watching these games, you don't really know what the coverage is. So just keep that in mind when you watch a game. That said, it felt like Texans defensive backs all day long were a step slow in coverage, a step slow in pursuit, and they were giving too much cushion as well. Now, that might be a scheme thing, but lots of yards after the catch. There were 5 plays in particular that were disastrous for the Texans. An Evan Ingram throw, catch and run for 21 yards. A screen pass to the Jaguars running back Johnson for 42 yards. A bootleg pass to their tight end Farrell, not Evan Ingram, for 42 yards. That catch and run by Calvin Ridley all the way to the Texans 57 yards right before halftime. And another throw to Calvin Ridley for 45. Those plays were bad. I don't know who you blame it on, but the guys who were getting picked on the most were, in order, Tavier Thomas, number 1. He got called for 2 defensive pass interferences. They might have been ticky-tacky, but he looked bad out there. I know it was Thanksgiving on Thursday, and I'm very thankful that my dad, who was a bit of a kitchen Nazi, did not overcook the turkey the way that Tavier Thomas was cooked today. I feel for him. Sucks when you have a bad day at the office, but the Jaguars saw him and were like, yep, let's kill him. And they did it for the majority of the game. There was a touchdown throw where he was in coverage. It wasn't good. He was the worst. Steven Nelson, number 2. He had a defensive holding call, and it felt like the guy that thinks very highly of himself. I believe on Twitter he is at Nelson Island. Not a great game for him. He had a defensive holding, as I said before. And then the other guy, and it was brought up on the comments, youtube.com/Paul Gallant. Paul Lopez said, Petrie is awful. Petrie is not having a great year. There was one play down the right sideline where I don't know what the hell was going on. It seemed like he just completely lost track of the ball. But luckily for the Texans, the Jaguars receiver dropped it. This could have been a worse game for the Texans defense had Jacksonville's receivers been able to catch the football. By my count, there were 5 drops. There might have been more. Maybe some of those plays were a little bit easy or more difficult than it was to me watching up in the press box all the way up at the top of the stadium. But it could have been worse. I mean, one of those touchdown passes was dropped. It was right in the guy's hands. So they had to kick a field goal after that. The Texas defense at the very least stopped the run. But all year long, against quarterbacks like Desmond Ridder, Bryce Young, Baker Mayfield, they've struggled, and Trevor Lawrence is the latest quarterback that they've struggled against. I thought they did a pretty good job against Joe Burrow for the most part. I thought they did a pretty good job against Kyler Murray for the most part. But the secondary hasn't been that good. And it wasn't Derek Stingley's fault today. I saw an interesting tweet by my guy Cody Stutes that Derek Stingley actually has more interceptions than Sauce Gardner to this point in his career. Stingley had an interception today, but we'll get to the refs in a little bit. Jalen Petrie got away with a pretty clear hold on that INT. So, again, not the best day for him at the office. But Stingley also had a critical, at least good positioning on a ball down the right sideline at the very end that gave the Texans one last chance. Unfortunately, they weren't able to make it happen. I'm not going to get to the referees quite yet. I want to wait for more people to join us. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant, Twitch.tv/Gallant says. But the Texans need a better kicker. We know that Matt Amendola won the game against the Bengals with a walk-off field goal, and I'm not going to act like a 50-yard field goal or a 58-yard field goal are easy, but they are definitely easier in today's NFL, especially if you're playing indoors. It's not like he shanked either kick today. His 50-yard attempt was slightly wide right. His 58-yard attempt hit the crossbar a doink at the very end of the game where they were trying to tie things up. I know that there was some debate over whether or not the Texans should have gone for it on 4th and 12. 4th and 12 is really difficult, even if C.J. Stroud is your quarterback. That is technically within field goal range. I'll credit D'Amico Ryans having the balls to actually kick the field goal there. And for his part, Amendola said afterwards, I'm never short on kicks. That's usually a kick I made. He had the distance on the 50-yard kick a little bit earlier. He just didn't have the direction. You don't feel the same confidence in Amendola out there that you did with Kymie Fairbairn or that you might have on the other sideline with the Jaguars kicker, who also missed a long field goal. I think it was a 55-yard field goal or so. So the Texans might have to reevaluate the way that they approach 4th down on the other side of the field going forward. I think the real tricky thing right now is that they might not have the salary cap space to bring in another kicker. Per over the cap, they have about $2.6 million in cap space to work with, but they're probably going to need to bring in an offensive lineman because Titus Howard went down. He was carted off the field. He is probably done for a long time, if not the entire year. And also, we've had those rumors over the course of the past week with J.J. Watt working in the building about J.J. Watt coming back. I don't know how much teeth there is to those J.J. Watt rumors. I was listening to the Texans pregame show today, and there was some skepticism, I think, that he would actually come back in. He's in England right now, but he was at the team facility last week. Anyway, it might be a little bit more difficult for the Texans to bring in another kicker is all I'm trying to say here. So there you go. The defense was the biggest problem today. And Matt Amendola, I mean, that's 6 points off the board, but it would have been 6 very difficult points. So don't be a dick online. I know some of us are generally going to give kickers a hard time. You only notice a kicker when he fucks up or if he's Justin Tucker and he's like the greatest kicker of all time. Otherwise, They're sort of like referees, which brings us to the referees. Ugh. Again, I don't want to blame this entire L on the refs. I know some of you guys will. And you're going to act like the Texans couldn't get off the field because of the refs. Well, it's not like there were 20 calls or something like that. But the calls did come in critical spots on third downs against the Texans. I'm more mad than those possibly ticky-tack pass interference calls, hold calls on Tavier Thomas, Houston Carson, Steven Nelson. I'm more mad about a 3rd and 9 pass down the left sideline to Tank Dell. It was right before Matt Amendola missed that 50-yard field goal, right before halftime, and of course it gave the Jaguars a chance to almost score before halftime. That could have been a massive point swing. When I first saw it happen, I thought, because of the guy who made the initial ruling, who seemed to be right next to the reception, that Dell had caught it. We're way up at a very high level. I saw the first replay, and then I thought to myself, I'm not sure that he got it. And of course, the referee overturned the call on the field. But they reviewed it. And when you watch the review, it seemed, unless the camera angles that CBS and we have are different than the angles that the NFL has, it seemed like he got his second foot down. And it's not like Tank Dell has the longest of legs, but it did seem like he had both feet down. There wasn't any bobbling going on. Seemed pretty conclusive that they could overturn that. So I'm not sure what the fuck was going on that one. I really don't. And that was a massive play. As far as the other ones, we're talking about the pass interferences. We're talking about the hold. Look, Thomas had a rough day. Is it really that unbelievable that Thomas would be called for some of those? But I thought they were ticky-tack. I thought that Trevor Lawrence, in those spots where there were pass interferences or holds, I thought he made very poor or inaccurate decisions with the football. It's one of the reasons that I think that C.J. Stroud is clearly better than Trevor Lawrence. If you saw it today, one of the things that Lawrence does that I imagine drives Jaguars fans crazy and is one of the reasons that I constantly push back against him as one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Don't get me wrong, I think he's good. He's talented for sure. But he airmails balls high often, and his accuracy is definitely not that of C.J. Stroud. So I felt like the calls that he was getting, some of them were uncatchable. I felt like he got bailed out a couple of times by some of those calls by the referees. Is that the reason that the Texans lost? You can make that argument if you want. But I feel like the Texans got a bit lucky with some of the misses by the Jaguars on the field. I mean, they had 5 drops in this game, you know? And it's not a good sign when 3 of your 4 leading tacklers, Christian Harris was the Texans' leading tackler, but when 3 of your 4 leading tacklers are Jalen Petrie, Tavier Thomas, and Steven Nelson, and then 5, check that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 of your top 6 tacklers are defensive backs, that's not a good sign. That's generally a sign that these guys are getting beat, and they were beat often. So I didn't like the refs, but I think that the defense was a much bigger problem. Let's read some comments here. You can join in a variety of different ways. Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports, YouTube.com/Paul Gallant, Twitch.tv/Gallant Says. Bobby Thornton comments, we sucked and the refs assist in the loss. Not going to say we should have won, but at least to make overtime without the refs. I don't think the refs pick sides. They just happen to suck. That is fair. I am with you. I feel like in the NBA, it's a little bit more dubious on that front. I do think it's a difficult job. We do back the blue in sports on the Paul Gallant Show, which you can hear ESPN 97.5 and 92.5, 10 to noon every single weekday. And sometimes we enjoy a good ref show, but this was not a great ref show. After the game, when I was in the locker room, the general sentiment from the Texans players was that this was a horribly called game. One of them told me that this was the worst refereed game he'd ever been a part of in 20 plus years of playing football. So we're talking youth level, Pee-wees, mites, Pop Warner, high school, college. Not a good sign because these guys are professionals, allegedly. More comments. Hack-a-Shack comments. No pressure on Trevor Lawrence whatsoever. Yeah, let's take a look. As far as QB hits, 2 QB hits the entire game. 1 Christian Harris, 1 Jonathan Grenard, 0 sacks. Another problem. What are the defensive backs supposed to do if there's no pass rush there? So, to their credit, I mean, they did make it difficult for Travis Etienne in the running game to get going, but no pass rush. What's the secondary supposed to do on that spot? Which is a shame because, okay, I mean, you got Will Anderson, you got Jonathan Grenard. Those guys should be creating more pressure. And this was a game where the Jaguars lost Cam Robinson to injury. I'm not sure if Lawrence came back, if Robinson came back in, and I'm going to have to check that out a little bit later. I got to say, one of the shitty things about watching the game in the press box, you sometimes are lost as far as what's going on in the field. You got to bring out the binoculars. But I remember listening to the radio call, and it did seem like Robinson was out for the rest of the game. Jeremiah Chavez, thanks for the $10 donation. Paul, I like you like a sister. Would you fight a 10-point buck to the death for $10,000? You're allowed to use a weapon, no guns, but you also have to be naked. Also go Texans. So what is this, Eastern Promises? For $10,000 to the death, a 10-point buck, am I allowed to have a spear? Also, let's take a look at the size of a 10-point buck. 10-point buck size. 10-point buck is effectively a buck with 5 points on either side of its rack or antlers. Okay, but I want to know how much it fucking weighs. And don't worry, we'll get back to the Texans, but okay, so we're talking like 235 pounds, 225 pounds. Here's my hope. My hope is that since it is a buck, meaning it's a deer, that it's a little bitch, and that it's not actually going to fight me to the death in the same way that I will fight it to the death. But if it's a fight to the death for $10,000, am I willing to throw away my life for $10,000? It would be a funny radio bit, but I mean, is it really worth it to get followers on YouTube and TikTok when you're dead for following through on a bet like that? If it's a fight to the death, I need more than $10,000. More than $10,000. Appreciate the question and the donation, Jeremiah. More comments here. Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. Pedin Del Gadio comments on the same play that Thomas was called for pass interference. The right guard moved early for Jacksonville. No call. Good call on that. There was another moment where the left tackle for the Jaguars clearly had a false start. I forget what moment in the game that was, and I will look that up in my show notes as I continue to go through questions. More comments here. JC Squared says we lost. RIP. That's just what happened. More comments. Skeeter 2 times. Lawrence didn't even fuck his hair up. Yeah, that's the worst because you want to ruin his hair. Is it good hair for Trevor Lawrence? Is that good? I feel like it needs a little more texture. It just feels weird that it just goes straight down, right? Jazz it up. You're in Jacksonville. Make it a mullet, huh? Although it maybe goes down a little bit too straight for that. If he had a little bit more like volume, some curls or something like that, it might be a more authentic Jacksonville look. But whenever I see him, he looks like King Arthur in that Disney classic, like The Sword in the Stone? He looks like him. A medieval page boy. I don't think it's a great look. Maybe you should grow a beard or something like that to add to the texture, but yeah, I'm not a fan of the hair. And I would know. I have good hair. What else do we have here? Lots of ways that you can jump aboard. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Paul Lopa. I'm not an ageist, but damn, we need some younger referees without glaucoma. Yeah, I do agree with that. I do agree that younger referees will be better. The problem is there probably is a bit of ageism when it comes to rising the ranks and getting to a point where you actually can referee. And here's another problem for referees as a whole. Who the fuck wants to referee at a low level when you're going to have to deal with annoying-ass parents all game long? And I mean, to rise the ranks, where do you start? Probably like a peewee game, volunteering. And then you go from that level to the next level to the next level. It's got to be very hard. And you got to know the rules. And some of these referees, I don't think, know the rules that well. More comments. Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. Bradley Hall comments. All anyone could do at the restaurant was smirk when the kick hit the crossguard. The player reactions were great. Yeah. D'Amico Senko 9, twitch.tv/Galot says Jerry curls. Could you imagine Trevor Lawrence with Jerry curls? That'll be fun. My kitchen is dirty asks, Paul, would you show up to work with your hair done like CJ Stroud? What, do you like braids? I can't do braids. I don't have enough hair. I would do it for money. I would do anything for money. I'm a whore. A cheap whore who moonlights as a radio show host and doesn't actually get laid despite being a whore. Sad. Bradley Hall comments, facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. Dynamo 10 plus minutes from going to the conference finals. This is Dynamo country. Well, maybe they should put the fucking games on TV and stop charging you $12 a month to watch the fucking playoffs for Major League Soccer. I got to watch the first game. I went to the third game, but I couldn't watch the second game. Ridiculous. Ridiculous. All right, let's continue to go through some of the stuff that happened in today's game. I thought CJ Stroud did all that he could. I am a big fan of his creativity when he extends plays. I think he's a lot like vintage Russell Wilson on that front because he finds gaps, moves into those gaps, does loop-de-loops, figure eights, whatever the fuck you want to call it, and it's really impressive how good he is at escaping defenders, shaking them off. And he needed to do that a lot today. He was sacked 4 times. It could have been way more than that. This felt a lot more like the Texans' offensive line that we saw the first couple of weeks of the year. There was one play where they just completely forgot to block Josh Allen, a couple of sacks that he had no chance on. There was a couple other sacks where he probably should have turtled instead of losing a bunch of yards, but I really love Stroud's escapability. I think that's a rare trait to have, and he's really, as I said before, like Russell Wilson when it comes to just finding ways to extend plays. But like Patrick Mahomes, I think he does an even better job of really waiting until the last second to take off and run. There was one play where he was rolling to the right where I thought he could have taken off and run, but I think that's the best trait that he brings to the table. And you look at his numbers today. He played great today. You know, considering there were 6 turnovers the last 2 games, some were questionable. One was on a snap exchange. One was on that bullshit-looking, what should have been called an incomplete forward pass. And then there was the dropped interception. But he had thrown some interceptions. He had fumbled the ball. I thought he took care of the football today. And considering he was running for his life the majority of the game, again, sacked 4 times, I thought this was a really great effort. There is a drawback to holding on to the ball too long. But I think that he overcame a shaky offensive line more often today. There are 2 plays that he probably wishes he had back. Remember that deep throw that he had down the right sideline to Tank Dell on the second drive of the game. He also had a deep throw to Schultz down the left sideline on the 5th drive, which was right before he missed field goal. Both of those could have been massive gains. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get that going. But I thought it was a really good game by CJ Stroud. And considering the Texans really didn't commit to the run, and they needed that from him. And Stroud led the Texans in rushing, 6 carries for 47 yards on the game. It really was a great game, I thought, by Stroud. Here's what sucks the most. And if there's any Jaguars fans watching or listening right now, I advise a little bit of viewer/listener discretion. Congratulations on the 8-3 record, being in first place in the AFC South and competing for the top spot in the AFC. The Jaguars are second currently. The Chiefs 8-3 have the tiebreaker based off of the best win percentage in conference games. The Jaguars are 6-2 in conference. The Chiefs are 6-1 in conference. So the Chiefs have played 1 less game. I think that the Jaguars, despite being in first place in the AFC South, are a mediocre operation. I know that Lawrence threw for 400 yards, but the majority of those were yards after the catch on short throws. He had a couple of ugly misfires. I know that there was a hold on that interception. It was still a shitty pass. It's not to say he's bad, but I think he is very overrated. He is put on a pedestal, and because he's in Jacksonville, there's not a lot of pressure on him being in Jacksonville. People sort of look the other way when he struggles, and I think that's bullshit. To be perfectly honest, I think it's bullshit. I don't think he's nearly as criticized as, say, someone like Dak Prescott, who's been playing out of his mind the last couple of weeks. And when Lawrence has a bad game, you don't hear about it. When Prescott has a bad game, he gets absolutely destroyed. And there's a bit of a double standard there. I think that they're not that dissimilar, Prescott and Trevor Lawrence. Lawrence threw 4 interceptions in the first quarter of a playoff game. But he came back. We're just going to fucking forget about that because Brandon Staley's a terrible coach and the Chargers pissed their pants again in a big spot. I hate that. Really, the receivers were dropping passes left and right. They had 5 by my count. The running game with Travis Etienne, nowhere to be found. Really, all that I was impressed by today was their pass rush, and Josh Allen specifically, who had 2.5 sacks. But it's hard to see the Texans overtaking them in the division now. The Texans are 6-5. The Jaguars are 8-3, and since the Texans don't have the 2-0 record against the Jaguars, and on top of that, the Texans have a 1-2 AFC South record, while the Jaguars are 4-1. We'll have to play Tennessee a couple of times, but they lost that game to the Colts. They're 3-3 in conference. I don't see it happening. Next 3 games for the Jaguars were tougher a couple of weeks ago. Bengals and Monday Night Football next week, but there's no Joe Burrow. Really think that Jake Browning is going to get it done? You hope, but then at the Browns, after that, the Browns did not look so good today against a Denver Broncos team that's now 6-5. Not a great game for Russell Wilson, but the Broncos defense really frustrated both Dorian Thompson-Robinson and P.J. Walker, who averaged 4.6 and 4.3 yards per attempt in a 29-12 victory. So they play the Bengals, the Browns, and then they play the Ravens. I know Sunday Night Football is going on right now, and as I'm speaking, the Chargers lead the Ravens 3-0 early in the first quarter. I think they'll probably lose to the Ravens, but it is a home game for Jacksonville there. That really is where they could potentially lose because the last couple of games of the season for the Jaguars, it's pretty damn easy. To end the year at Tampa Bay, Carolina, at Tennessee. They probably won the AFC South with today's victory, which sucks. It also sucks for the AFC playoff picture for the Houston Texans. The Texans would have been in if the season ended today before all the games. But now that the games are done, they are tied with the Denver Broncos. They have the tiebreaker over Denver based off of the best win percentage in conference games. The Broncos are 3-4. The Texans are 3-3. Sunday's game's huge. Sunday's game's basically another playoff game for the Texans, which you probably didn't think a couple of weeks ago. The Broncos have been red hot, but the Texans are on the outside looking in because the fucking Indianapolis Colts, without Anthony Richardson, are at 6-5 with a 4-3 AFC record and a 2-2 division record. They're the last team in if the season were to end today. They beat the Buccaneers today, 27-20. So, and the one good news for the Houston Texans is the Buffalo Bills lost to the Philadelphia Eagles. So we could take a look at the schedules for all of those teams ahead. Obviously, the Texans play the Broncos next week. The Broncos schedule the rest of the way. They play, oh boy, at Houston. Okay, that's tough. At the Chargers, that's tough. At the Lions, that's pretty tough. Home game against the Patriots, that's an easy win. The Patriots suck, Jesus. On Christmas Eve, home game against the Chargers, at the Raiders, who seem to have a pulse. Okay, so the Broncos, that's a tougher schedule, I think, than what the Houston Texans have the rest of the way. As far as the Bills' schedule, the rest of the way, Buffalo, oh boy, at Kansas City, Dallas, at LA, New Year's Eve against the Patriots, at the Dolphins. I would say 4 of those games they will probably be favored to lose in. And then you got the Colts. The Colts schedule the rest of the way at the Titans, at the Bengals, Pittsburgh, at Atlanta, Vegas, Houston. Oh, they might sneak their way in with Gardner Minshew. Shane Steichen will definitely get some Coach of the Year consideration over DeMeco Ryans if they're able to make that happen. Of course, Steichen put, I thought, Ryans in a locker in that first game. The Texans games rest of the way. Broncos playing better. At the Jets. Jets are such a joke at quarterback. You see that fucking Hail Mary that they threw at the end of the half on that Black Friday game. It got returned for a touchdown. How do you throw a pick six on a Hail Mary? They are comical. At the Titans, a Cleveland game on December 24th. Cleveland's defense is good. And the Texans defense has made a lot of quarterbacks look good this year. Titans at the Colts to wrap up the year. Does feel like it's going to be between the Texans and Colts for one of those last playoff spots. Let's read some more comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Twitch.tv/Gallant says. Bobby Thornton asks, what position would you target in free agency or the draft for the Texans this offseason? I always think you should be looking at the defensive line, specifically the defensive tackle position. You might need to draft an offensive lineman, given we don't know what happened with Titus Howard. Can't hurt to draft an offensive lineman every single year. I think the good news for the Texans is that at quarterback, wide receiver, you don't necessarily need to draft somebody. I wouldn't say no to drafting a wide receiver, but the wide receiver group looks pretty damn good with CJ Stroud. You don't need to draft a running back. Definitely think about drafting a corner as well. Defense is probably where it happens. I would like a defensive tackle. I would not mind a corner. Because, again, do we know that Derek Stingley is going to be a lockdown corner? Promising signs the last couple of weeks. But Steven Nelson across the way from him, not a great game for him today. So right now, as we are immediately after the Texans lost to the Jaguars, that's where I would look. More comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Twitch.tv/Gallant says. Facebook.com/Paul Gallant Sports. Bradley Hall says the Dynamo are on FS1 tonight. Oh, they got the big boy channel finally. D'Amico Senko 9 on Twitch.tv/Gallant says, anyone else laugh when they hit the crossbar? Fuck that. Don't say that. That's not cool, man. You laughed at a doink against your beloved Houston Texans? What would Clay Walker say? Well, Clay Walker would say this.
It's football time in Houston, and we're ready to play.
Then he would hit you in the head with his guitar and say, drive me smooth, motherfucker. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Bobby Thornton, I'm more worried about Howard. Howard's always hurt. Never been that great. Nice contract as well. It's a shame that the injury situation has forced Howard to play left guard. If there weren't the injuries that the Texans had this year, Juice Scruggs would have gotten more time playing left guard. We did get to finally see Scruggs out on the field, their second-round pick, which is nice because out of Kenyon Green and Juice Scruggs, the last 2 years, it's you either haven't seen Green or Scruggs or they've been hurt. Clarence Austin, YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Excuses. We already beat the Ravens, sir. Last year, so Jags not scared of the Ravens. That game was last year. Okay, this is a Jaguars fan that's commenting. Look, I'm just not that impressed by your operation. Just not. What are your excuses for Trevor Lawrence's 4 interceptions in the first half? And do you actually think that Trevor Lawrence is going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the game? If you tell me yes, you are lying. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Edward Hicks says, it's many bad calls, but we lost in the trenches today on both sides of the ball. No pressure on Trevor. Couldn't protect CJ. That is where we lost. Yep, I think that's pretty simple. Rick Hagewood. I know I keep bringing this up, but if we had signed Emily Harrigan, she would have made those field goals. 58 yards? I don't want to sound sexist, but is a lady capable of hitting a 58-yard field goal? Twitch.tv/Gallant says, Titans fever. Okay. Say Iowa found a way to knock off Michigan. Could Iowa knock Michigan out of the playoffs? Not going to fucking happen. Michigan would have to score like negative points. I don't see why Iowa scores on Michigan. I don't. But I'm not the biggest college football expert. Random question, but appreciate it, Titans fever. Keeping us on our toes. Rick Hegwood says, Hutch earned some more playing time. Did have a nice catch over the middle. Maniac slap, 3rd place in the AFC South. Yeah, that does suck. Enjoy that battle for second with Indy. Yeah, I guess we have to. Another fucking Jaguars fan. Blah. More Jaguars fans in here. Gio Legaspi, Jags fan here. It was a great game. Looking forward to seeing these two quarterbacks duke it out for years to come. CJ Stroud is the truth. NGL. Duval. Rick Hegwood says that this lady, Emily Harrigan, hit a 60-yard field goal on YouTube. Okay, but are you going to be able to do it with the crowd there? Maybe she would. I don't want to sound like an asshole, a sexist, keeping women, below a glass ceiling or something like that. But, I'm sorry. Skeptical. Poor Marine says, Paul, it costs $19 a month to comment on X. LOL, what the F? Yeah, because this is now streaming on X. I just subscribed to their blue checkmark service today, probably on a temporary basis to see if it actually helps out more. That does suck. I was shocked by how much it cost for me just to get that check mark. So I doubt that that's going to last a very long time, us doing it on Twitter. Bleh. What a bummer. Do you want to jump on somebody really quickly? There's this guy in Seattle that like comments on all my stuff and he gets mad often. Just an angry, bitter person. But he said Stroud was abysmal this game. Imagine being that fucking stupid where you thought that CJ Stroud was bad today. You got to be a complete fucking moron. And I get it. Like, maybe he just saw the stats. But even if you look at just the stats, like, how the fuck do you think Stroud had a bad game today? No interceptions like there were the last couple of weeks. Clearly better than Geno Smith or Drew Lock or the last Russell Wilson we saw. So, it's weird that there are still some, I guess, doubters of CJ Stroud, but I think across football, everyone's got to accept he's the rookie of the year. Rick Hagwood says she played Division I soccer at Pitt in front of big crowds. It's soccer. I'm sorry, there's no big crowds there. More comments here. Lots of fans mad about the refs, but the Jags played better in the first half. That's from Poor Marine on Twitch. Really quickly, I guess we just have to give up on Texans fans showing up to NRG Stadium on time, and it sucks with the game kickoff being moved up to noon next week, but that stadium was largely empty for the beginning of the game, and the top levels in particular were empty. I saw some comments on a video that I posted, I think on Friday on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Paul Gallant, that were saying, well, they priced people out of certain parts of the stadium. The people in the club seats are never going to be sitting in their seats, and that's all fine and good. And it is not great to watch those games from the upper levels. I mean, we're watching from the press box, and we're super far away from the field. You might prefer to watch the game on television, but if there was ever a game for the entirety of Texans fans to show up at NRG Stadium, this was it. And it's not like they played poorly, but this was the game. It's first place is on the line. Broncos fans do travel well. It's not ideal weather these days in Denver. I know the Colorado weather's sporadic, but I'm curious about what it's going to look like on Sunday at NRG Stadium. It is depressing that the city just doesn't seem to be fully buying in. And they would have today, too, at the Texans won. And, of course, they lost. More comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. Rick Hagwood. I think Nick should at least take a look. Couldn't hurt. You bring in a lady kicker this point of the year. It's going to be a distraction, fair or unfair. This is an off-season thing that you do. Wesley Woolsey comments. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant. We looked unorganized today in general. I'm not mad at the refs either. I'm a little mad at the refs, but the refs weren't the reason they lost. Tavier Thomas was getting smoked today. It seems, even though the refs had a bad day today, I guess rather get hit with a PI than a touchdown. That is actually true. Choi comments, if the Texans secondary is bad, then you're lucky you don't have a mess that is the Eagles defense. Their passing defense is so horrendous and made Josh Turnover Allen look good. The MVP race is now getting hotter. What was Josh Allen back in it? Because the Bills did lose today, for what it's worth. Poor Marine comments, twitch.tv/Gallant says, it's because of the last 22 years that people don't buy into the Texans. I get it, but I mean, it's clearly different with the quarterback and the coach, right? Like, it's not Bill O'Brien. It's not forced Patriots South. I suppose if you weren't going to buy in with Deshaun Watson under center, fine. But I don't know. I think to this point, like, and obviously Watson got hurt in his rookie season, but I think to this point, like, Stroud's clearly been a better player than Watson was in that first year. One last comment. A couple last comments. Riku1987 says, I'm a bit mad at the refs. However, we aren't quite good enough to beat good teams and the refs. Got to win in the trenches, and that's probably what they got to address in the offseason. Choi comments, it's between CJ Stroud and Jalen Hurts. Based off of Vegas odds, I'm not sure Stroud's in the conversation. I think he should be. I think anyone who's watched him every single week thinks he should be, but it probably is Hurts to lose. He was the front runner before he got hurt down the stretch last year. The Eagles are the first 10-win team in the league. No other team even has 9 wins. it is definitely partially about the narratives of the season, and the Eagles are the best team right now, just by record. Even if maybe you're not that impressed and they're not blowing out teams the way that the Dallas Cowboys have been. Anyway, there you go, guys. Appreciate y'all for tuning in. If you can subscribe, like this video, I would greatly appreciate it. YouTube.com/Paul Gallant, Twitch.tv/Gallant says. Instagram, look for @SportsGallant. I'm not sure if it posted to that. We will see afterwards. On Twitter as well, or X, whatever the fuck it's called. @Gallant says. I guess per pouring, you got to subscribe to watch it on Twitter. It's also available wherever you get your podcast for free. Apple, Spotify, Google, Stitcher, and SoundCloud. And if you ever have a question, gallantsays@gmail.com. We'll have another episode tomorrow. We'll figure out the time. Probably going to be around 6 o'clock Central Time. Until then, I am merely Paul Gallant. Thank you so much for joining me. So long. Farewell. Have yourselves a wonderful rest of your Sunday. And make sure you check out the Paul Gallant Show, 10 to noon, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5 tomorrow. I will also be on Fox 26 at some point in the morning. Until then, peace!